Амбасадоре Дејвид Гир, благодарам за ова интервју.
Благодарам. Welcome to Europe House.
Не случајно велам Дејвид Гир, новиот министер за европски прашања, ве нарече Ричард Гир, амбасадор на европската делегација. Како го примивте тоа?
I can hardly complain if someone is comparing me to a famous actor who's had such achievements in the past, so it's a compliment.
Добро, интересен одговор. По изборите на 8 мај, очигледно е дека има нова политичка реалност во земјава. Што значи тоа за односите меѓу Европската унија и Северна Македонија?
We want North Macedonia to join the European Union, and we want it to come in as soon as possible. Now, the new coalition is committed to that task too, and says that it wants to see European integration moving forward and wants to see the country entering the European Union rapidly. So we're looking forward to working intensively with it towards that goal. Well, what does that mean in practice? That means implementing the reforms that are necessary for the country to be prepared for membership. That means ensuring implementation of existing agreements, and that also means the implementation of the commitment related to the inclusion of Bulgarians within the constitution. As with the previous government, we'll work very closely with them. We tend to pay more attention to what actually is done rather than what is said. That's important. But we believe very much that this is the way forward. Now, having said that, I think there are two important points here which I have made frequently in the past. One is that while it is the government that needs to lead the process of European integration, the process involves many, many actors and many institutions, and they will all have to play their part. Parliament, President, the different organizations of state, the state institutions, they will have a role to play. And secondly, it will be important that the political parties, with notwithstanding differences of opinion in many areas, that across the political divide, they come together on the European integration agenda and work together to achieve that goal. We saw a good example of that in the last Parliament, where there was agreement across the political divide to change the rules of procedure. And that was a discussion that took place with members of the European Parliament. That was a real positive. This Parliament will benefit from that. So we need to see a lot more of that, where European integration is truly a national project.
Кога веќе зборувате за ова, сакам да ве прашам, што мислите за одлуката на ВМРО ДПМНЕ во владата да ја земе коалицијата Вреди или Влен, а не коалицијата предводена од ДУИ? Од ДУИ реагира дека според нив тоа е прекршување на основниот договор од 2001 година меѓу двете најголеми етнички заедници.
I think this is an issue of domestic politics, worked out between the different parties. I don't think there's a role for the European Union to comment or to intervene in this case. Of course, we want to see the Ohrid Framework Agreement implemented, and in particular we expect within Parliament the Badinter rules and protections to be applied fully. But otherwise this is a domestic issue.
Од ДУИ сметаат дека Влен го нема легитимитетот, дека тие го имаат легитимитетот да ја представуваат албанската заедница во владата.
Of course, we listen carefully to everything that the different political players are saying. But again, as I say, this is a matter of domestic politics, and it's an issue on which we, from the European Union, do not get involved.
Да се вратиме сега на односите меѓу земјава и Европската унија. Министерот за надворешни работи Тимчо Муцунски беше првиот што имаше средби со министрите за надворешни работи на земји членки на Европската унија во Луксембург, а потоа и со представници на Европската комисија и Советот на Европската унија во Брисел. Какво е ехото што слушате како ехо од тие средби први на новата влада со представници на ЕУ?
This was a very good signal. The fact that the new Foreign Minister Mutsunski left the inauguration or completed the inauguration in Parliament and then travelled directly to Luxembourg for a meeting with the foreign ministers of the 27 member states and other foreign ministers from the region. It's a very good positive signal of commitment. And it's important because we also want to see ministers, political leadership here and in other countries in the region as part of the discussions that we have within the European Union on the future of the European Union and on the future of Europe more widely. So this is a positive signal. We're looking forward very much to seeing other parts of the leadership, Prime Minister, President, other ministers, being regular visitors to Brussels, so that this dialogue can continue and these discussions ensures that North Macedonia's voice is heard in Brussels and in capitals across the European Union.
Вие лично не бевте во Луксембург и Брисел. Дали ги прочитавте извештаите од средбите, да речеме, што било кажано, што се дискутирало за најинтересните теми?
Normally an ambassador from the country wouldn't travel for a meeting of the foreign ministers, so no, I was not there. I've heard feedback from the various discussions that took place. I think there was a useful discussion over lunch where they talked about a number of issues, including security issues in view of the wider security context and the challenges that Europe is facing. That's good. That's a positive discussion. Otherwise, I'm not going to comment on more detailed discussions that took place.
Дали наскоро треба да очекуваме посета на председателката Гордана Силјановска-Давкова и на премиерот Христијан Мицкоски на Брисел?
I'm sure that both will be very welcome in Brussels as soon as mutual timings can be worked out. As you know probably very well, at the moment there's a lot of internal discussion going on in Brussels following the results of the European Parliament elections. So we'll have to find a time that's mutually acceptable, but they'll be very welcome.
Ги споменавте договорите кои според вас треба да се почитуваат. Ја слушнав и американската амбасадорка Анџела Агелер како вели дека е воодушевена од тоа што премиерот и министрите решиле да се законат користејќи го уставното име и да го користат уставното име надвор од земјата. Што е вашиот став за односот на новата влада кон договорот од Преспа?
I understand the feelings of some people in North Macedonia, also in Greece, where they have very strong feelings about the Prespa agreement, have very strong feelings about the use of the constitutional name. But the point is, this is an agreement which is now 5 years old and should be behind us. It's an agreement which is an achieved agreement and one which has brought results. It's allowed for this country, North Macedonia, to join NATO. It has allowed the country to advance on its European path. It has resulted in very positive figures in terms of trade. Overall trade has doubled in the period since the Prespa agreement was signed. We've seen improvements in cooperation in areas such as culture, people-to-people, tourism, even in military cooperation. So there are real benefits that have accrued thanks to the Prespa agreement. So our position is that the Prespa agreement needs to be respected in all of its aspects now, as it has been in the past, and we expect all concerned to respect it, including in the use of the constitutional name ergo omnes towards everyone.
Добро, може би во последната реченица е директниот одговор на прашањето, но еве уште еднаш да се обидам. Представниците на ВМРО ДПМН во власта сметаат дека користењето на уставното име на документи, на табли на институциите за време на заклетвата и надвор е сосема доволно за да се каже дека го почитуваат договорот од Преспа. Дали според вас тоа е така, паралелно користејќи го името Македонија дома во домашен контекст?
Well, our understanding is that the use of the constitutional name by officials is required in all contexts. And that is the understanding of the Prespa agreement until now, and we expect that to continue in the future. Of course, we welcome the fact that the swearing in of the government took place with the constitutional name, but our understanding is that this should be used by officials in all contexts.
Во врска со промените на Уставот, од кој зависи продолжувањето на пристапните преговори со Европската Унија, премиерот Мицкоски инсистира на реципроцитет во изјавите деновиве. Вели, ако веќе земјава ги внесува бугарите во нашиот устав, тогаш и Бугарија треба да ги почитува основните права на македонците таму. Дополнително, зборувајќи за договорот за добрососедство со Бугарија и веројатно реферирајќи се на интервјуто на вашата американска колешка за Радио Слободна Европа, вели договорот за добрососедство е веќе репреговаран со така наречениот француски предлог, сакајќи да каже дека може одново да се репреговара. Што мислите вие за тоа?
I think, well, let's two things here. First of all, good neighbourly relations. I think we all understand And we all agree that good neighbourly relations are in the interests of everyone. I've just described some of the benefits that have flown in the improved neighbourly relations between Greece and North Macedonia following the Prespa Agreement. There is the Treaty of Friendship with Bulgaria, which provides a framework which would allow for improvements in relationships in many ways. And I think it's important that everyone concerned works to deepen the positive relationships between North Macedonia and Bulgaria. That's one issue. Concerning the constitutional changes, our position is unchanged on that. As I said before the elections, and as I've said afterwards, we expect the country to adopt these constitutional changes. The constitutional changes were agreed in July 2022, and as a result, they basically brought to an end this disagreement that had prevented North Macedonia from moving forward. Following that, you opened accession negotiations with the European Union. You started the screening process, which you successfully completed at the end of last year. So there was real movement forward. So now we expect that commitment to be honoured and for the changes to be made within the constitution, which brings those who self-identify as Bulgarian within the explicit protections of the constitution. I don't see the possibility for changing the negotiating framework either.
Добро, ако бидеме прецизни, Мицкоски зборува за потенцијално репреговарање на договорот за добрососедство и при тоа се реферира на францускиот предлог, веројатно сметајки на протоколот кој што исто така паралелно во тој момент беше потпишан помеѓу Бугарија и Северна Македонија. Што мислите вие за тој аргумент?
Well, we don't share the same understanding of the way in which that is reflected in the negotiating framework. And I think the important thing is, of course, if Bulgaria and North Macedonia wish to discuss elements within the Treaty of Friendship, that is an excellent thing. We should encourage them to do so. But for the implications for the Treaty on Friendship, for the negotiating framework are the same, in the sense that it is still required to make this change to the Constitution in order to move to the next step. By the way, a negotiating framework which has Macedonian language as one of the negotiating languages.
Знаете дека тоа веројатно го покажа резултатите од изборите. Македонските граѓани се уморни од темата за членување во ЕУ. Таа трае предолго, почна во 2005-та со добивање на кандидатскиот статус, со многу сопки, препреки по тој пат. Прашањето е, постои ли на вистина обновена желба кај земјите членки на Европската Унија за продолжување на процесот на проширување на ЕУ и за прием на нови членки, за земјава на вистина да има зошто да брза?
I think we can spend plenty of time looking over the past 20 years and analysing where problems arose, how they were solved, was that the best way forward, where responsibilities lie. There are some responsibilities on the EU side. There are some responsibilities for non-implementation of reforms on North Macedonia's side. It's a complex picture. But I think it's really important, it's probably the most important thing I can say today, is to look at the big picture, because there truly is momentum on enlargement. This was confirmed by the leaders of the heads of state and government of the 27 when they put enlargement and preparing for enlargement on the EU side in the strategic agenda for the next 5 years, so it's going to continue to be important. This is partly accounted for by Russia's brutal war on Ukraine, which has meant that the discussion on enlargement is now not only through the perspective of democracy, prosperity and stability, all very important, but also from a security angle. So there is momentum. And if you just look at the last few weeks, we've seen the opening of accession negotiations with Ukraine, with Moldova, an intergovernmental conference with Montenegro. So there is undoubtedly movement. And why I say it's important is that there is an opportunity, and this opportunity should be seized. So I really encourage the country to take this opportunity and to move forward. I've said, we want you in the European Union, we want you as soon as possible, but it's largely on you now to seize the opportunity and move forward.
Знаете дека вакви слични пореки се слушаа пред подпишувањето на Преспанскиот договор. Имаше ентузијазам кога се подпиша и кога се смени уставот практично, земјата доби ново уставно име и тогаш се велеше еве сега конечно патот ви отворен и ништо не се случи. Граѓаните имаат сомнеш дека навистина ЕУ го сака Западниот Балкан во ЕУ.
First of all, it's not a question of whether the EU wants it or not. It's the question, is it in the interests of the EU to have the Western Balkans reformed within the EU? And the answer is yes. And this point has been made repeatedly by the leaders of the European Union. This is an issue of security, our security, the EU's security. This is an issue of prosperity, stability, and democracy. And this point is made repeatedly by the leaders. The same can be said for this country. All of those are good reasons why the North Macedonia and the partners in the Western Balkans should join. So it's not a question of being nice. It's not a question of wanting you in the club. It's a question of our interest is for you to be in the European Union, albeit in a reformed way so that you're able to have the benefits of membership and able to play a role as a fully fledged member. That's the hard-headed thinking. People are very open here. They frequently make the point that you make when I meet them, when I travel around the country, their disappointment, and yet nonetheless there is still a high support for joining the European Union. And what I'm saying is that there is a way forward now, there is an opportunity, take the opportunity, do the reforms. The reforms in any event are in the interests of citizens, will bring the country forward, make those reforms, and you will join the European Union.
Големи надежи и најави се врзани за така наречениот план за раст на Европската Унија, преку кој земјите од регионот треба да добијат околу 6 милиарди евра, дел во грант, дел во заеми. Нашава земја треба да добие некаде околу 750 милиони евра. Дали земјава го има завршено сето оно за да ги добие првите 7 од 100 тие 750 милиони евра?
Okay, let's start with this plan. Well, what's it about? What's the goal? And basically, the plan emerged out of conversations between the leadership in Brussels and leaders across the Western Balkans. And there were two concerns from the leaders here. Number one was that the rate of growth within the partner countries here was not sufficient to catch up with the rate of growth in the European Union, and so there was a gap in what we call economic convergence. You can see that because look at the figure of GDP per capita spread is about 41% of the EU average for this country. So there's a big gap. That was the first question, was how do we bridge the gap? Because if you want to join the European Union, you can't start out with an absolutely massive gap. You need to reduce the gap. And the second question was from leaders saying, look, we know we get many benefits from you, not least through your assistance, but the real benefits that come from EU membership we'll only feel the day we join. There's a kind of big bang and suddenly the gates are open and everything comes. And that's difficult to sell to citizens who've perhaps seen not always the simplest of paths towards the EU, as you've mentioned. We need to explain to them, we need to offer benefits earlier. So the answer to this is this proposal from the European Commission, now firmly on the table, which is, number one, we offer access to parts of the single market, which is the real generator of growth within the EU itself, so parts of the single market, in exchange for you carrying out certain key reforms, which mean that when you have access to those parts of the market, you can, one, benefit from it on an equal footing, and two, you don't represent a threat to the market itself because of unfair competition. So first of all, access to single market. Secondly, you carry out the reforms. Thirdly, we provide, as we've said, very substantial support in grants and in loans to help you with those reforms and help with the investments necessary to deliver. And the fourth part of the bargain is that you work with your partners in the Western Balkans to remove barriers to trade so that there is a much more efficient flow of trade within the region itself based on EU standards. So that's the idea. It's quite a radical proposal. How's it going? The last government advanced very well in negotiating elements of it and talking about what we call a reform agenda, these reform elements, when and how they should be implemented. And we've already engaged in a very good discussion with the new government on the same thing, and I hope that we'll be able to reach an agreement shortly, but we're still in discussion with the new government.
Добро, тука има повеќе елементи можеби за дискусија, веројатно и вие сте ги чуле. Прво има забелешки и од лидерите во регионот дека 6 милиарди евра не се доволни за да се постигне како цел ова што вие го зборувате, да се набали гапот во GDP-то на земјите од регионот со тој од Европската унија. Како одговарате вие на тоа?
You don't get growth by the EU making a check. Here you are, 6 billion euros, that's it. Nothing else. That's why you have these other elements. First of all, reforms, because reforms means that you will have foreign direct investment. You'll become more competitive in itself. For example, one element is productivity. The productivity of workers in this country is very low compared to the EU. The reform agenda helps to address this by helping to build up skills, to ensure investment, so that productivity in itself. So part of that is a result of the reforms. And a second part is the removal of barriers to trade within the region, either wholly or even in part, will already bring very substantial dividends. So it's a complete package. It's not about a check from Brussels. It's about delivery of reforms, delivery of changes in the region, and then in exchange for that, access to the single market. The single market access then will then really generate investments, and generate the kind of changes and improvements in livelihoods where you see the general standard of living rising over time. It's not tomorrow, it takes time, but it will, it's a short period covered by this growth plan, and it will, I think, very much contribute to growth.
Дали добро разбираме дека парите кои што ќе доаѓаат од ЕУ во рамките на планот за раст се поврзани со исполнување на одредени реформи, но не се за финансирање на тие реформи?
So basically there are two kinds of financing. Some of the financing will be going into the general budget, and therefore that gives a certain fluidity, a certain comfort to the government in implementing reforms, while we're following very closely on how these are implemented. And others are for investments, including in infrastructure. So in a sense, you're right, they are supportive of reform. Not every single one of them will be linked to individual measures.
Добро, ќе видиме, се разбира, во наредниот период како се тоа ќе функционира. Само дали може да ни кажете кога ќе стигнат првите 7%?
We don't have an exact time for that. I mean, what we need to do is conclude an agreement with the government, as we do in all of the partners in the region, and then some other agreements need to be reached, and then we hope that we'll be able to do this sometime in the early autumn. But it will depend upon the speed with which we reach final agreement.
Од увидот што го имате, дали реформската агенда од планот за раст е компатибилна со реформската агенда со која што оваа влада го почнува својот мандат?
Look, the new government has its program, which sets out its broad priorities. We're engaging with all of those priorities. In principle, I don't see incompatibilities, but it's responsible for a government to look in depth at what they're committing to, and that's what the discussion is about. Bringing them up to speed so they understand what's included, what the commitments are, they can reflect, and then together we can agree and move forward.
Едно од прашањата кое што привлекува големо внимание е најавата за распуштање на Судскиот совет и на Советот за јавни обвинители. Дали е тоа чекор што би добил поддршка од Европската унија?
So, first of all, it's very clear that there needs to be substantial reform in the area of rule of law and the judiciary, and we welcome the fact that the government is ambitious in this term and has put it high up in its priorities. We will work very closely with them and are very much looking forward to having much more detailed discussions on these issues. Concerning the Judicial Council and the Council of Public Prosecutors, there is already a wealth of material out there showing how it needs to move forward. We have the peer review, which, as you remember, was from last year, contains 40 recommendations. And there are many other documents. There are the screening process, the country report. So there's a wealth of material available to say how to move forward. And we will look forward to discussing this in detail. Where I would say a word of caution, we of course have to discuss what it means when this language about dissolving Judicial Council, dissolving the Council of Public Prosecutors, what does it mean in practice? Because of course there is a temptation to apply an approach of what I might call legal nihilism. In other words, sort of sweeping everything away and starting afresh. And that's attractive and may seem, you know, that superficially seems attractive. But experience shows that this is not the most effective way of proceeding. With the Judicial Council, it's clear what needs doing. We have the recommendations. So our advice on this is to proceed, let's have a discussion, let's talk to all the stakeholders, let's work together, let's build on what's been achieved. And I note particular that the Judicial Council has adopted an action plan to implement the 17 recommendations from the peer review, which fall within their power to do so. So let's build on what's been achieved and to make sure that these bodies really serve the purpose that they should, which is to be the guardians of the independence, professionalism and integrity of the judiciary.
Дали препораките од извештајот на оценската мисија на ЕУ се дел од реформската агенда за планот за раст?
I don't want to go too much into the details of the reform agenda because it's still being discussed and negotiated. But of course, rule of law is an element within it, because without a rule of law state, you're not going to get the foreign direct investment. We're not going to have the certainty that when you're a part of the single market, that you are able to play on a level playing field.
Амбасадоре, ова е веројатно едно од вашите последни интервјуа. Вашиот мандат истекува во текот на ова лето. Моето прашање во таа смисла би било како ќе памтите оваа земја?
Well, yes, indeed, this is one of the last interviews that I'll be giving, and the mandate comes to an end in August. You know, it's been a tremendous privilege to be here over 4 years. A privilege, first of all, for me to represent the European Union, which has developed enormously in the past 4 years in response to considerable challenges. But a privilege above all to be living in this beautiful, in many ways enchanting country, which I think has touched me a lot and has also, I think, affected my partner equally. You know, when you live in a country, and I've lived in a number in the course of my career, in Georgia, I lived in Russia, Palestine, Belgium, you get changed by it. You learn from it. You know, even though we've had ups and downs, certainly starting in lockdown was not easy, and there have been times of frustration and difficulty, as well as positive sides. What's always shone through for me is the openness, the generosity and the warmth of people. And even though when we leave, I will certainly leave space for my successor to do a good job here, I'm sure we will keep very close contacts with many people here.
Што се вашите планови за овиднина?
Well, I'm lucky enough that I think in beginning of October I will be retiring, which means in principle, which means in practice, that I can do those things which over the last 38, 39 years I've not had time to do. So we have a whole plan of ideas, and also spend some more time with family and with friends. What I'll not be doing is sitting on the sofa. I think I intend to stay very engaged in many issues, and so I'm very much looking forward to what is a different period of life. I don't really recall it retirement, but a change.
Го знаете наследникот ваш? Името му е Михалис Рокас.
Yes, I do indeed. I mean, he's a very experienced diplomat from our service, like myself. He was previously the EU ambassador in New Zealand, and he's currently serving as the EU ambassador in Malaysia. We've been in close contact in preparation for the handover.
Дали е хендикеп негов тоа што нема многу искуство од регионот?
First of all, let me just finish. I mean, he seems very engaged and very much looking forward to the challenge of representing the European Union in North Macedonia, and I'm very confident that he'll do an excellent job. I don't think that this is a problem. I think he is somebody who learns very fast, I think he's sufficiently experienced to be able to grasp very quickly the main challenges here, and he will bring fresh perspective, fresh energy and fresh blood to this post.
Амбасадоре, благодарам за ова интервју и благодарам за вашата дипломатска мисија во Македонија.
Thank you very much. It was always a privilege.